Clara Whitmore pressed both hands flat against the wooden post outside Cordell's only hotel and told herself she was not going to cry. Not here. Not in front of strangers who had already looked away. She had sold her wedding ring to buy the stage ticket. She had written to the school board 3 times. And now the man at the desk had just said there was no position, no room, and no refund. She had nothing. Not one coin, not one door. And the sun was going down hard and hot over the mountains. If this story already has your heart, hit subscribe and drop the name of your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's go back to where it all began. The stage pulled out of Cordell before Clara Whitmore could ask it to wait. She stood in the middle of the main street with her trunk at her feet and the letter folded in her hand. The same letter she had read so many times. The creases were soft as cloth. It was signed by a man named Horace Pendleton, chairman of the Cordell Township School Board, and it said very clearly, "We are pleased to offer you the position of music instructor commencing the first Monday of August." It said she would be met at the stage. It said there was a room arranged at the Caldwell house. It said a great many things, and every last one of them had turned out to be false. The man at the Caldwell house desk had looked at her the way a man looks at something he doesn't want to touch. "We don't have a reservation under that name," he said. "Whitmore," she said again. "Clara Whitmore. It would have been arranged by the school board." "Ma'am, we don't have any arrangement with the school board. Not this month." "Is Mr. Pendleton available? Could someone send word to him?" The man's eyes moved past her to the 2 other men sitting near the window. One of them snorted. The desk man cleared his throat. "Mr. Pendleton passed away in June, ma'am. His son took over the board, and I don't believe he's kept all his father's commitments." Clara heard the words. She understood them. She just stood there a moment with the letter pressed against her ribs and let them settle into her bones one at a time. "I see," she said. "You got kin here in Cordell." "No. You got money for a room. It's $1.50 a night." She had 43 cents in the bottom of her coin purse. She knew the exact number because she had counted it twice on the stage, trying to calculate how long it would last her if things went wrong. She had not counted on things going this wrong. "I'll need to make arrangements," she said. "May I leave my trunk here while I speak with someone at the school board?" The man shrugged. "Ain't gonna haul it anywhere." She walked out into the heat. Cordell, Colorado territory sat at the base of a mountain range that didn't care much for the people living in its shadow. The town had 1 main street, 2 saloons, a dry goods store, a blacksmith, a church that needed paint, and a school building that looked like it had survived a hard decade and wasn't sure it would survive another. Clara stood on the boardwalk in front of the hotel and looked at it all and breathed through her nose the way her mother had taught her when panic came on fast. "You are a widow," she reminded herself. "You have already survived the worst thing. This is just a hard afternoon." But her mother had never been stranded in a frontier town with 43 cents and a forged letter of employment because that was what it was she was beginning to understand. Not forged, maybe. Just irrelevant. A dead man's promise written in good faith, honored by no one. She walked to the school board office, which turned out to be the back room of the dry goods store. A young man behind a cluttered desk looked up when she came in. He had the kind of face that has never been surprised by anything because it has never expected much from anything. "I'm Clara Whitmore," she said. "I have a letter of appointment from your father." He leaned back in his chair. "I know who you are. Somebody telegraphed ahead saying you were coming. Then you know about the position." "The position's been filled," he said. "Hired a local woman back in July. Didn't have a way to reach you in time." He paused. "You got a return ticket?" "No." He made a sound that wasn't quite a sigh and wasn't quite anything else. "That's unfortunate. Is there any other position available? Any work at all?" "Ma'am, it's August, harvest season. Women's work around here is mostly already spoken for. I'm a trained musician and a qualified teacher. I have references from—" "I'm sure you do." He was already looking back at his papers. "You might try the saloon. They sometimes need a piano player." She turned around and walked out before she said something she couldn't take back. The heat on the street felt different now. Thicker. The mountains to the north threw a long shadow across the far end of town, but it didn't reach where she was standing, and she had nowhere to walk toward it. She sat down on the edge of her trunk outside the hotel and folded her hands in her lap and tried to think. She was 30 years old. She had been a wife and then she had not been. Her husband, James Whitmore, had died 14 months ago of a fever that came on fast and left faster. And when the accounts were settled, there was nothing. Not the house, not the savings. She had thought existed. Nothing but a good name and a modest collection of sheet music and a trunk of clothes. She had spent 12 months teaching piano lessons in a borrowed parlor in Denver, saving enough to make this trip, answering this letter, starting over in a place where no one knew her face. And now this. The sun dropped another inch. The main street of Cordell went about its business around her horses and boots and wagon wheels, nobody stopping, nobody looking twice. An older woman in a bonnet walked past and glanced down at her and kept walking. A man leading a mule crossed the street without looking in her direction at all. She might as well have been a piece of luggage someone had left behind. She was figuring out where she might sleep. She had noticed a livery stable at the end of the block, and people slept in liveries sometimes on the hay when they had to, when the hotel door opened behind her and the desk man stepped out. "Ma'am," he said, "I'm going to need you to move your trunk off the front step. It's in the way." She looked up at him. "I beg your pardon." "The trunk. You need to move it. We got guests coming and they don't need to step over luggage. I was told I could leave it here." "That was before. It's almost 4 o'clock now and I need the entrance clear." She stood up. She picked up the handle of the trunk and tried to pull it, and it was heavy. It had always been heavy, full of the sheet music and the teaching books, and the 2 changes of clothes, and the few things she had kept from the house before the creditors came, and she managed to drag it 3 feet before she had to stop. "I'll get it," said a voice. She turned around. The man standing behind her was not from Cordell. She knew that before he said another word, though. She couldn't have explained exactly how she knew it. He was tall, broad through the shoulders, the way a man gets from real work, not from reputation. And he wore a hat that had seen genuine weather. His face was windburned and angular, and there was something in the set of his jaw that said he was not a man who offered to help with things he didn't mean to follow through on. He reached past her, lifted the trunk, as if it weighed nothing particular, and set it against the wall of the building out of the doorway. "Thank you," she said. He nodded once, that particular cowboy nod that means you're welcome and asks nothing in return. He started to move past her. "Excuse me," she said, because she had nothing left to lose. "Do you know of anywhere in town that might rent a room for less than $1? Anything? A storage room. I'm not particular." He stopped. He looked at her for a moment, not the way the desk man had looked at her, not assessing her for trouble or inconvenience, but straight on, the way a person looks when they are actually seeing you. "Where'd you come in from?" he asked. "Denver. I had a letter of appointment from the school board, but the chairman died, and his son has filled the position. I have no room, and I don't know anyone here." He was quiet for a moment. A horse went by in the street. Somewhere down the block a door banged shut. "You're a teacher. Music, piano and organ." She straightened her spine. "I am a professional woman with legitimate references. I'm not asking for charity. I'll find a way to pay my way once I have a situation." "I didn't say you weren't," he said. She waited. He pushed the brim of his hat up slightly with one finger and looked down the street toward the mountains. "I've got a ranch house out on the North Road," he said. "About 4 miles. House has got more rooms than I use. You could stay there while you sort out your situation." She stared at him. "I'm sorry." "It ain't charity," he said, and there was something almost dry in his tone, like he had anticipated the word. "It's a practical solution to a practical problem. You need a place. I've got space that's sitting empty." "Sir, I don't even know your name." "Ethan Cole." He didn't extend his hand. He just stood there and said it like it was a fact she could take or leave. "Clara Whitmore. Mrs. Whitmore. He caught the ring finger, bare now the ring long sold, and recalibrated without making a thing of it. It ain't proper by town standards, I know, but I'll sleep in the bunkhouse, same as I do in the summers when the ranch hands are working late. You'll have the main house to yourself. I'll have my foreman's wife check in if that makes it more comfortable. You're serious? She said. I don't generally say things I'm not serious about. She looked at him, at this stranger with the weather-beaten hat and the direct brown eyes, and tried to find in his face what he wanted from her. Men wanted things. She had learned that the hard way in the year after James died, when the creditors came, and the neighbors shifted, and certain kinds of help turned out to have strings attached that she hadn't known about until they pulled taut. She looked for the angle. She looked for the calculation. She didn't find it, which almost frightened her more. Why? She asked. He was quiet for a moment. Because you're not sleeping outside tonight, he said. That's the short answer. The longer one is that my mother would haunt me from her grave if I walked past a woman in trouble and didn't do something about it. He paused. She was particular about that kind of thing. Clara looked at her trunk. She looked at the hotel door. She looked at the street, at the dust and the heat and the fading afternoon light, and she thought about the livery stable and the 43 cents and the school board chairman's son and his face when he said, "That's unfortunate." I would need to pay you back, she said. Whatever the room would be worth, I'll keep a ledger. That's fine. And I would need to find work quickly. I won't be a burden. I've got a ranch full of men who don't play piano, he said. Burden's not the word I'd use. She almost laughed. She hadn't expected to almost laugh, and it caught her off guard enough that something behind her eyes stung with it. All right, Mr. Cole, she said. I accept, for a short time until I find a situation. He picked up her trunk again. My wagon's on the south end. You ready now, or you need more time in town? She looked at Cordell one more time at the hotel and the school board office and the street where no one had looked at her twice. I'm ready, she said. The ranch sat at the foot of the mountains with its back to a long pine ridge and its face to the valley, and the evening light hit it in a way that made the whole thing look like it had been there so long it had grown roots. It wasn't fancy. Nobody would call it fancy. But it was solid. A long main house, built of good timber, a barn that looked like it could outlast the century, a bunkhouse set 50 yards off, and a corral where 3 horses stood in the early evening gold. Clara sat in the wagon seat beside Ethan Cole and said nothing. He said nothing either. The road from Cordell had been 4 miles of dust and mountain shadow, and he had driven it without small talk, which she was grateful for, because she wasn't sure she had any small talk left in her. When he pulled up in front of the house, he set the brake and climbed down, and came around to offer his hand for the step. His hand was hard and dry, and he released hers the moment she had her footing. He unlocked the front door, a heavy door solid wood with a good iron latch, and pushed it open. Kitchen's through there, he said. There's food in the larder, help yourself. Bedroom's the first door on the left. There's clean linen in the chest. He set her trunk inside the doorway. I'll be in the bunkhouse if you need anything urgent. Mr. Cole? He paused in the doorway. The key, she said. Do I have a key? He reached into his coat pocket and produced a key, a single iron key on a small loop of leather, and held it out to her. She took it. This is the only one, she asked. One I carry, he said. The other's on a hook in the kitchen. You'll want to put that one out of sight if you've got any sense. Why? He looked at her directly. Because once word gets around town that you're out here, there'll be people who won't like it. And I want you to know you can lock this door, and I cannot open it from outside. He paused. That matters. She held the key in her hand and looked at it. It does matter, she said quietly. He nodded. He stepped back. Good night, Mrs. Whitmore. Good night, Mr. Cole. He walked across the yard to the bunkhouse. She watched until the door closed behind him. Then she stepped inside. The house pushed the heavy door shut behind her and locked it. She stood in the front room, in the near dark, and let herself breathe. The house was quiet. The way houses are quiet when they've been empty a long time. Not peaceful exactly, but waiting. She could feel it around her, all that held silence, all those rooms with no one in them. There was a fireplace on the north wall unlit, a table near the window, 2 chairs, and in the corner, half hidden behind the shadow of the chimney wall, something she hadn't noticed at first. An organ, a pump organ, the kind you found in parlors and small churches, with a carved wooden case and ivory keys, yellowed a little from age and disuse. She crossed the room slowly and put her hand on top of it. The wood was dusty. The pedals were stiff when she pressed one experimentally with the toe of her boot. She didn't play it, not that night. She just stood there with her hand on the wood and felt something she couldn't name, some thread running between herself and whoever had last played it, whoever had last filled this silent house with sound. She went to the bedroom. She made up the bed with the clean linen from the chest. She washed her face at the basin and changed out of her traveling clothes. She sat on the edge of the bed in the dark and listened to the pine ridge and the horses in the corral and the distant sounds of the bunkhouse across the yard. She had 43 cents a trunk of sheet music and a key to a stranger's house. She had been married, and then she had not. She had been employed, and then she had not. She had made this trip on a dead man's promise and arrived at nothing. But the door was locked. The key was hers. The night was outside, and she was in. She lay down, and after a while longer than she would have liked, but shorter than she feared, she slept. Ethan Cole did not sleep for a long time. He sat on the edge of the bunkhouse cot, the same cot he had used through every summer since the ranch hands started staying on, and it had never seemed uncomfortable before, and looked at his hands in the dark and tried to figure out what exactly he had done. He had driven home from Cordell with a strange woman in his wagon. He had put her in his house. He had given her the key. He had done all of this in under 20 minutes, and he could not explain it, which bothered him in the way that things bother a man who generally knows his own reasons. He told himself it was practical. It was the truth as far as it went. He had 3 empty bedrooms in a house that was otherwise just him alone every night for 6 years. Practical. He told himself it was what his mother would have done. That was also true. Eleanor Cole had never turned away a person in need in her life, and she had made sure her son knew the difference between courage and charity. Courage being the thing you did when you knew it might cost you, and charity being the thing you did when it cost you nothing. What he had done today was not charity. He was not sure yet what it was. He heard from across the yard a sound he had not heard in a very long time. It was nothing at first. And then it was something, a thread of music, thin and tentative, as if someone was just testing the keys, learning the instrument with their fingertips. The organ. The old pump organ that had been his mother's, and that he had not touched since the day they put her in the ground. He sat very still on the bunkhouse cot and listened. Clara Whitmore was playing his mother's organ in the dark. She was playing something quiet and searching nothing he could name. Maybe nothing with a name, just notes, finding each other, a melody working itself out in real time. It wasn't a performance. It was something private. Something she was working through her fingers, the way a person works through grief or fear, or a day that was harder than they expected. He sat there and listened until it stopped. Then he lay down on the cot and stared at the bunkhouse ceiling and told himself it was nothing. Just a woman playing an old instrument. Just notes in the dark. He believed himself about as much as he usually did. Morning came in hot over the mountain ridge, the way August mornings do in that country. Not gradual, not gentle, just suddenly bright, and the night gone and the heat already building before a person's boots are on. Ethan was up before first light. He always was. He had horses to tend, and a fence line that needed looking at on the east pasture, and work enough to fill the day without thinking. He dressed in the bunkhouse, crossed the yard quietly, and started on the barn before the first gray light had finished becoming actual daylight. He was carrying water to the near corral when he heard the main house door open. Clara Whitmore came out onto the front step. She had her hair pinned up and she was wearing a plain blue dress that had seen some travel and she was carrying a small jar, and she was looking at it with the expression of a person who has just made a decision. "Mr. Cole," she said. "Good morning." "Morning," he said. "I found coffee in the larder, and I hope that was all right. There was enough for 2 cups. She held out the jar. "I didn't know how you take it." He looked at the jar for a moment. "Black's fine," he said. She walked out and handed it to him. He took it. She stood there with her own cup and looked at the mountains, which were doing what mountains in Colorado do in the early morning, going from dark to purple to a color that doesn't have a good name. "I owe you an explanation," she said. "No, you don't." "Last night, the organ. I shouldn't have touched it without asking, and You didn't wake me," he said, which was not entirely true, but was easier. "It's fine." "It was your mother's." "It was," he said. She looked at him sidelong. "How long ago did you lose her?" 6 years. He said it the way he said most difficult things, plainly, without ornament, because ornament didn't help. "I'm sorry." She looked back at the mountains. "I lost my husband 14 months ago. I still reach for things that aren't there." He didn't say anything to that, but he didn't look away either. "I played that organ for about an hour last night," she said. "And I slept better than I have in months. I don't know what that says about me." "Says you're human," he said. She considered that. "I'd like to clean it if you'd allow it. Tune it properly. I have a tuning key in my trunk. I travel with one occupational habit. It needs regulation work. The bellows are stiff, but it's a good instrument. It shouldn't be sitting under dust." He looked out at the corral. The horses were moving. He needed to get back to work. "Do what you like with it," he said. "I'll pay for any materials it needs." "With your 43 cents, he said. She stopped. Her chin came up. "You heard that?" "The hotel front step isn't exactly private." A long pause. "I have more than that," she said. "I have my teaching books, my music, my references. I will find work, Mr. Cole." "I don't doubt it." He finished the coffee and handed back the jar. "I'll be on the east pasture most of the morning. If you need anything before noon, ask Doyle, he's my foreman. He'll be near the barn." He was 2 steps away when she said, "Mr. Cole." He stopped. "Thank you," she said. "For the room, for the key, for the coffee jar, for all of it. I want you to know I don't take it lightly." He put one hand to his hat brim. The old gesture. What his mother called the last honest currency in a world running short on manners. "See you at supper, Mrs. Whitmore," he said, and he went to work. By mid-morning, word had reached Cordell. It traveled the way all important information travels in small frontier towns, through women at the dry goods store, through men waiting for their horses to be shod, through whoever happened to be standing on the right corner at the right moment. By 11 o'clock, the version circulating was Ethan Cole brought a strange woman home from the stage yesterday and set her up in his house. By noon, the version had become, she's got no money, no kin. Nobody knows who she is, and she talked him into it somehow. By 2 o'clock, the final version had taken shape. She's trouble, and Cole is too stubborn to see it. This last version was the property of one Jasper Doss, who was Ethan Cole's cousin on his mother's side, and had been for the last 4 years, angling in the careful way of men who are patient with their greed for the moment when the Cole ranch might become available to him. He had reasons, he told himself. The land should stay in the family. Ethan had no wife, no children, no clear heirs. It made sense that the place would eventually come to Jasper. It was practically inevitable. What was not in Jasper's plan was a widow from Denver with a letter of appointment and a trunk full of sheet music. He stood in front of the dry goods store and listened to Harold Biggs tell him what he'd seen at the hotel. The woman and her trunk. Cole putting her in his wagon, and he asked 2 questions. Who is she? And what does she want? Harold didn't know the answers to either question, which meant Jasper had to find them himself. He saddled up in the early afternoon. He had plenty of reasons to ride north. He told himself he was being a good cousin, checking in on family. He told himself he was concerned. He told himself Ethan was too isolated and too proud and too likely to be taken advantage of by the kind of woman who specialized in taking advantage. By the time he turned his horse up the north road toward the Cole ranch, he had convinced himself he was doing a generous thing. He had a talent for that kind of convincing. Clara heard the rider coming while she was at the organ. She had spent the morning taking it apart carefully, methodically, the way her teacher had shown her when she was 19 and apprenticing at a music school in Philadelphia. The bellows needed reseating. 3 of the reeds wanted cleaning. The casework was solid, but the joints had dried out and would need a light application of oil. She had made a list. She had a way when things fell apart of making lists. She heard the horse in the yard, and then she heard a knock at the front door that was harder than it needed to be. She opened the door. The man on the step was maybe 45, with a face that had started out narrow and gotten narrower with the years. He had Ethan's dark eyes, but where Ethan's were direct, and still this man's moved around taking stock. "You the woman staying at Ethan's?" he said. "No, ma'am. No tipping of the hat." "I'm Clara Whitmore," she said. "May I ask who you are?" "Jasper Doss, Ethan's cousin." He looked past her into the house. "He here?" "Mr. Cole is on the east pasture." "Ah." He said it like "ah" meant something. His eyes were on the dismantled organ parts laid out on the front room floor. "What are you doing to that organ?" "Restoring it." "That's Eleanor Cole's organ." "Yes," she said. "Mr. Cole gave me permission to work on it." Jasper Doss looked at her for a long moment. The look had a specific quality, not hostility, not exactly, but the kind of territorial assessment a man makes when he is calculating how much of a problem something is going to be. "How long you planning to stay?" he asked. "Until I've secured a position in town," she said. "I had a letter of appointment from the school board that turned out to be no longer valid. I'm arranging alternatives." "You got references?" "I do." "You got kin in the territory?" "No." He nodded slowly. "Ethan's a good man," he said, "but he's a trusting one. Doesn't always see when he's being taken advantage of." Clara felt something go very still inside her. "I'm not taking advantage of anyone, Mr. Doss. I'm sure you believe that." He smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. But a woman arrives in town with nothing, and 2 hours later, she's got herself set up in a rancher's house. That's a thing people notice. And they talk. And the talking has a way of making things complicated for everyone. "Including for you," she said. Something shifted in his face. Just slightly. "I'm trying to protect my cousin." "Of course you are," she said. "I'll tell Mr. Cole you stopped by." She looked at him steadily until he stepped back. He put his hat on, he hadn't taken it off, and turned for his horse. "You should think about whether this situation is good for you," he said without looking back. "Town's already talking." "Town talked about me in Denver too," she said. "When my husband died and I had to sell the furniture to pay the creditors, I found that I could survive it." He mounted without answering. She watched him ride back down the north road. Then she went back inside and she sat down in front of the organ, and she played until her hand stopped shaking. Ethan Cole came back from the east pasture at 5:30 with his shirt dark from sweat and a mood that had nothing to do with Clara Whitmore, and everything to do with a fence line that had rotted through in 3 separate places, and a bull that had taken advantage of it before Doyle caught him. He was tired in the specific way of a man who has been doing hard physical work in August heat, which is a tiredness that goes straight to the bones and doesn't leave much room for anything else. He pulled up short when he saw Jasper's boot tracks in the yard dirt. He recognized them the same way he recognized most things about his cousin, without having to look hard, because he had spent a lifetime learning the signs. Jasper's right heel wore down faster on the outside, and the print had a particular shape from boots that cost more than a working man needed to spend. He stood in the yard for a moment and looked at the tracks leading to and away from the front door of his own house, and the tiredness in his bones shifted into something else, something quieter and more careful. He went to the house. Clara was at the organ when he knocked. He knocked on his own door, which was a strange thing to do, but it seemed right, and she called for him to come in, and he pushed open the door and found her reassembled at the keyboard. The organ back together, the front room smelling like the beeswax oil she'd found somewhere and used on the casework. Jasper was here, he said. It wasn't a question. She turned on the stool to face him. He was. He left about 2 hours ago. She looked at him carefully. You're not surprised? No. He took his hat off and held it. What did he say to you? That the town is talking, that you're trusting and don't always see when you're being taken advantage of. She said it plain without flinching from it. That I should consider whether this situation is good for me. Ethan was quiet for a moment. He turned his hat in his hands once, a slow rotation that was as close as he came to showing agitation. I'm sorry he said that to you, he said. You don't need to apologize for him. I know I don't need to. I want to. He looked at the organ. Did you play it today? I restored it first, then I played it. She watched his face. Is that all right? He looked at the instrument, at the clean casework, at the keys that were no longer quite as yellowed looking, at the little row of stops his mother had labeled in her own handwriting 40 years ago, the labels still legible. Vox Humana. Celeste. Diapason. He had not looked at those labels in 6 years. What does it sound like? He asked. Now that you've worked on it. She turned back to the keyboard. She pulled out the Vox Humana stop and pressed a single chord, not a melody, just 3 notes, finding each other in the evening air, and the sound that came out was different from what he remembered. Cleaner. Fuller. Like something that had been held at a distance was suddenly close. He stood very still. It sounds like it used to, he said. He hadn't meant to say it out loud. I thought it might, she said quietly. It's a good instrument. It just needed someone to pay attention to it. He didn't answer. He put his hat back on and told her supper would be whatever was in the larder and that she was welcome to use the kitchen, same as before. And he went back outside. He stood in the yard for a moment with the sound of those 3 notes still in his chest and told himself that Jasper was going to be a problem, that the fence line needed more work tomorrow, that he had 100 practical things to think about. He thought about the organ instead. He thought about it for a long time. Word in Cordell didn't slow down, it accelerated. By the second morning after Clara's arrival, the story had developed the particular texture of small-town mythology, which meant it had grown in all the places that were unclear and hardened in all the places that made someone look bad. The version circulating by midweek had Clara Whitmore arriving with nothing and attaching herself to Ethan Cole within hours of stepping off the stage, which was accurate enough in its outline, but wrong in everything it implied. Mabel Greer, who ran the dry goods with her husband, said she felt sorry for Ethan. He's a kind man, she said to the women who came in for flour and thread, and kind men get used. It's practically a law of nature. Harold Biggs at the barber shop had a different theory. She's clever, he said. Got to be to work that fast. Woman knows what she's doing. Ruth Calloway, who was 64 and had lived in Cordell since before it was called Cordell, listened to all of it and said nothing. She had her own ideas. None of them had spoken to Clara Whitmore directly. None of them had knocked on the door of the Cole Ranch house and introduced themselves and asked how she was getting on. They had opinions as elaborate and detailed as portraits painted entirely from a distance. Clara knew some of this because Doyle's wife, a straight-backed woman named Frances, who was approximately Clara's age and had a dry humor that Clara immediately appreciated, came to the house on the 3rd morning with eggs from her own chickens and reported it without being asked. You're the main subject of interest in 3 counties, Frances said, setting the eggs on the kitchen table with the casualness of someone delivering weather news. I gathered, Clara said. She was making coffee. She made enough for 2 now without thinking about it. Is it bad? Nothing that's actionable, Frances said. Just talk. Jasper Doss had himself a long conversation with Pastor Neil on Tuesday, which is the kind of information I thought you'd want. Clara set down the coffee pot. About me. About what it looks like a woman of no established connection living in a man's house. Frances took the cup Clara offered. Ethan know about the pastor visit. I'll tell him. He won't care, Frances said, which was either reassuring or the opposite depending on how you looked at it. Ethan Cole hasn't changed what he does because of what the town thinks since he was about 19 years old. But you might care. It can make getting a position harder. I know. Clara sat down across from her. I've been writing letters. There's a school in Harrow Valley, 12 miles east. Another in the mining settlement north of here. Both need teachers. Harrow Valley is a good community, Frances said. The mining settlement is rough. I wouldn't put a woman alone up there. Then Harrow Valley. Clara wrapped both hands around her cup. I just need time. A week, maybe 2. Take what time you need. Frances looked at her steadily. Ethan doesn't mind. Whatever Jasper told you to the contrary. He told you too. He didn't have to. Frances stood up. I've known Jasper Doss for 15 years. I know what he does when he feels threatened. She picked up the egg basket. You're not doing anything wrong, Mrs. Whitmore. I want you to know that somebody in this county thinks so. After she left, Clara sat at the kitchen table for a while and felt something loosen in her chest that she hadn't known was tight. The particular loneliness of being talked about and not being able to answer back had been sitting on her since the night she arrived, and Frances's plain casual declaration of support, "You're not doing anything wrong," moved through her like water through parched ground. She went back to the organ. She played for an hour, and then she wrote 3 letters to Harrow Valley, to 2 other schools she'd found mentioned in a week-old newspaper in Ethan's kitchen, and she set them on the hall table to go with Doyle to the post office. She was not going to be a problem anyone solved. She was going to solve herself. Ethan came in for the midday meal and found Clara at the kitchen table with a ledger open in front of her. An actual ledger narrow-ruled that she had apparently found somewhere or brought with her, and she was entering things into it in a small, precise hand. "You're keeping accounts," he said. "I always keep accounts," she said, not looking up. "Column 1 is what I owe you for the room. Column 2 is what I owe you for food from the larder. Column 3 is what I'll have once I secure a position and can begin repayment." He got himself a cup of water from the pitcher and leaned against the counter and looked at the ledger. The columns were meticulous. She had assigned a fair market rate to the room, which was actually higher than he would have charged if he'd been charging. "You're putting the room at 50 cents a night," he said. "That's the going rate at a boarding house." "This isn't a boarding house. I'm aware of that." She looked up then. "I intend to pay what is fair, Mr. Cole. I have no interest in being in debt to anyone, especially not someone who's already done more than he should have. You don't owe me anything." The ledger disagrees. She closed it and set it aside. "Frances brought eggs this morning. She told me about Jasper and the pastor." He sat down across from her. He'd been expecting that. "What did she tell you exactly?" "That Jasper had a conversation with Pastor Neil about the impropriety of my being here." Clara folded her hands on the table. "Mr. Cole, I want to ask you something directly, and I'd like you to answer me directly." "That's generally how I prefer things. Is my being here going to cause you real damage? Not gossip, not social discomfort. Real damage to your standing, your business, your relationships with people who matter to you." He thought about the question the way he thought about most serious questions, which was to give it its proper weight before answering. "Jasper matters to nobody but Jasper," he said. "The pastor's a good man, but he follows the loudest voice in the room, and right now, that's Jasper. My standing with anyone who counts hasn't changed." He paused. "The question you're really asking is whether you should leave." She held his gaze. "Yes." "The answer is no," he said. "Not because I don't take your concern seriously. Because you leaving doesn't solve anything. It just gives Jasper what he wants and puts you back on the street." "What does Jasper want?" He looked at her steadily. "He wants the ranch," he said. "He's been working toward it for years. He doesn't have a legal claim, but he's been building a social one-cousin family loyalty. The idea that Ethan Cole is alone out here and can't manage without family support." He said it without heat. "You showing up is an inconvenience to that plan. A woman in the house who's competent and independent and not looking to be managed, that disrupts the story he's been telling. Clara was quiet for a moment. That's a harder truth than I expected. I generally find the harder truths are the more useful ones. So I'm inconvenient to him. You're a complication to him, Ethan said. Which is different. A complication he has to think around. She looked at the table. I didn't come here to be anyone's complication. I know that. He stood up. But you're here, and the organ sounds the way it used to, and I've got enough problems without adding guilt about throwing a woman out in the middle of a situation she didn't create. He picked up his hat. Write your letters. Doyle'll take them to post. Give yourself the time you need. He was at the kitchen door when she said, Mr. Cole, when did you last eat a proper midday meal? He stopped. I cook for Doyle and Francis sometimes, she said. It's not out of my way. He turned around. She was already at the larder opening it with the business-like efficiency of a woman who has decided something. There's salt pork and the end of a bread loaf and some dried beans, she said. It's nothing much, but it's better than eating standing over the sink. He stood there for a moment, this broad-shouldered rancher in his own kitchen doorway, caught completely off guard by something as ordinary as a woman offering to feed him. All right, he said. He sat back down. They talked while she cooked. Not about Jasper, not about the ranch, not about any of the heavy things that had been sitting between them since she arrived. She asked him about the horses in the corral, and he told her about them, their names, their histories, which one was stubborn and which one was just waiting to be asked properly. And his voice changed when he talked about horses, the way some people's voices change when they talk about music, and she noticed it and filed it away. She told him about Denver, about the parlor lessons, about the particular combination of pride and mortification involved in teaching the children of the women who had been your social peers. They were kind about it mostly, she said, but kind in that specific way people are when they're aware of a fall in circumstance and don't want to draw attention to it, which draws more attention to it. I know that kind of kindness, he said. Do you? He was quiet for a moment. When my father died and the bank called in a loan he hadn't told anyone about, we lost the south pasture. Half the town showed up with food. For about 6 weeks we couldn't sit down to a meal without something somebody had brought. He paused. It was generous, and it was the longest 6 weeks of my life. Clara looked at him. How old were you? 22. And your mother? 50, and furious. She made every casserole and every pie and every jar of preserved fruit, and she thanked each person individually, and when the last one was gone, she sat down at the organ and played for about 3 hours, and didn't say another word about it. Clara turned back to the stove. She pressed her lips together against something. She sounds remarkable, she said. She was, he said. Stubborn as a herd of the wrong cattle, but remarkable. The salt pork was starting to smell like something worth eating. She was aware of him at the table behind her, not imposing, not watching her in the way that felt like being watched, just present. A comfortable weight in the room. She hadn't realized how much she had missed that. Just the simple fact of another person being in the room without it being a performance. Can I ask you something personal? She said. You can ask. Why are you still alone out here? It can't be for lack of opportunity. A ranch, a working operation, She stopped. I'm sorry. That's not my business. No, it's a fair question. He was quiet for a moment. I was engaged once, 8 years ago. She was a good woman. She came out here for the summer, and she was honest enough with both of us to say that this... He made a brief gesture that somehow encompassed the ranch. The mountains, all of it, wasn't the life she wanted. We parted without unkindness, but it narrowed something down for me. This place takes a particular kind of person, or a person with nothing left to lose, Clara said before she could stop herself. He looked at her. Is that how you see yourself? She dished the food. She brought a plate to him and took one for herself and sat down across from him at his own kitchen table. 14 months ago, yes, she said. Now, she looked at her plate. Now I think I might have been angry, which is different from having nothing. Angry means there's still something left that can be protected. He picked up his fork. He looked at her the way he sometimes did, straight on, no flinching, and said, "Good." She looked up. "I mean it," he said. "Hold on to that." The letter from Harrow Valley came back in 6 days. Clara was at the organ when Doyle brought it up from the post, and she opened it at the keyboard with the particular controlled calm of someone who has been hoping for something and has prepared extensively for disappointment. "Dear Mrs. Whitmore," the letter began. "We thank you for your application for the position of music instructor. We regret to inform you that due to recent community discussions regarding candidates associated with certain situations in Cordell Township, we are at this time unable to proceed with your application." She read it twice. Then she set it on top of the organ and put both hands in her lap and looked at the wall. Associated with certain situations in Cordell Township, Jasper Doss had written to Harrow Valley, or had someone write on his behalf, or had spoken to someone who had spoken to someone. She didn't know the mechanism, but she knew the result, and she knew whose hand was in it, and the rage that moved through her was so clean and total that it frightened her a little. She was still sitting there when Ethan came in from the barn. He looked at her face. He looked at the letter on top of the organ. "Give it to me," he said. She handed it to him. He read it. She watched his jaw set. "He didn't sign it," she said. "It's all implication. Whoever they spoke to in Cordell, it could have been anyone he's not named anywhere. I can't prove a thing." "I know," Ethan said. His voice was very level. Too level. "And if I try to appeal it or explain, I look defensive, which confirms whatever story he told them." She stood up from the organ stool. "He's very good at this. He's been practicing a long time." Ethan set the letter down. "I'm going into town. Ethan." It was the first time she had used his name, and she heard it happen with some part of herself and filed it away. "Don't do anything that makes this worse. I'm going to talk to Pastor Neil," he said. "Jasper works through the pastor because he thinks the church carries more authority than he does individually, which is true. So I'm going to talk to the pastor. And say what? The truth." He picked up his hat. "That you're a professional woman with legitimate references, and that you're here with my full knowledge and consent, and that anyone saying otherwise is misrepresenting the situation." "He'll say it looks improper." "He'll say what Jasper told him to say," Ethan said. "And then I'll tell the truth, and people can make their own determination." She looked at him. "You really believe that? That the truth is enough?" "Not always," he said. "But it's all I've got that's mine, and I intend to use it." He drove into Cordell. Clara sat back down at the organ. She pulled out the Celeste stop. Her mother had called it the crying stop because of the slight wavering in the tone, and she played. She played everything she was too proud to say out loud: the fury at Jasper Doss, the shame at the letter, the particular humiliation of being undermined in the dark, the gratitude for Ethan's going to town, the fear that it wouldn't matter, the stubborn, ember-bright refusal to be defeated by a man who had never even met her. She played it all into the organ, and the organ gave it back, changed, not smaller, not comfortable, but somehow shaped, somehow bearable. Pastor Neil was a man of genuine good faith and limited imagination, which is a combination more common than is generally acknowledged. He listened to Ethan Cole with the careful attention of someone who knows he has made a procedural error and is working out how to acknowledge it with dignity. "I may have been given an incomplete picture," he said, which was as close as he was going to get to admitting that Jasper Doss had used him. "I think that's likely," Ethan said. He wasn't angry, or rather he was, but he'd banked it down to a useful low heat. "I want you to know who Clara Whitmore is. She has references from 3 musical institutions in Denver. She had a legitimate letter of appointment from Horace Pendleton, which turned out to be void through no fault of hers. She's been in Cordell 11 days, and in that time, she's restored my mother's organ, corresponded with 2 schools about employment, and kept meticulous accounts of every cent she intends to pay back." He paused. "She's the most respectable woman I've met in a decade, and the town's been treating her like a disease. The pastor looked at his hands. Jasper expressed concern. Jasper has concerns that are entirely his own and have nothing to do with Mrs. Whitmore's character. He said it flatly without elaboration, and something in the flatness made the pastor blink. "You're certain?" the pastor said. "I'm certain." Another pause. The pastor looked at his bookshelves at some middle distance at the window. "I'll speak to the Harrow Valley School Board," he said. "I know Reverend Marsh there. I can clarify the situation." "I'd appreciate that." "And Jasper?" "I'll handle Jasper," Ethan said. It came out softer than everything else, and somehow that made it more final. He drove back to the ranch in the late afternoon. He told Clara what had been said. She was in the kitchen and she listened with her hands still, which was how he had come to understand. She processed serious things, not with movement, but with a certain quality of stillness, like a pond after a stone. "He's going to speak to Harrow Valley," she said. "Tomorrow." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Thank you, Ethan." He nodded. He was turning to go when she said, "Can I ask you something else?" "You can. Did Jasper say anything else to you when you spoke to him last?" The question was careful. He looked at her. "I haven't spoken to him directly since he was here," he said. "We'll have that conversation soon." "Don't do it on my account alone," she said. "I know he's family." "He's blood," Ethan said. "There's a difference." She held his gaze. "Yes," she said. "I suppose there is." Jasper came to the ranch uninvited on the evening of the 13th day. Clara heard the horse and looked out the window and recognized him by the way he sat in the saddle slightly forward, like a man perpetually pressing toward something. She set down her book and waited. He knocked. She opened the door. "I need to speak with Ethan," he said. "He's in the barn," she said. "I'll get him. I'll wait." She did not invite him in. She went to the barn, found Ethan with a horse he'd been working on all week, a young gelding that had come to him spooked and was slowly learning that hands didn't have to mean harm, and she said, "Jasper's at the front door." Ethan looked up from the gelding's left foreleg. Something passed across his face. "I'll be there," he said. She walked back to the house. Jasper was still on the step. She left the door open, which was invitation enough, and went to the kitchen, where she could hear without straining. Ethan came in 2 minutes later. She heard the particular sound of him boots on the floor, the creak of the front room, and then his voice. "Jasper." "Ethan." A pause. "We need to talk about this situation." "All right. She's been here 2 weeks. The whole county's talking. Neil came to me this morning and told me you'd been in to see him." Jasper's voice had the quality of a man controlling agitation, not quite succeeding. "I'm trying to look out for you." "I know you think that," Ethan said. "What does that mean?" "It means I think you believe it." A pause. "I also think you've been writing letters to school boards and speaking to people you know in other townships about Mrs. Whitmore's character, which makes it harder for her to secure a position which keeps her in a situation you can use against her. And I think you've been doing it knowing exactly what you were doing." Silence. "That's a serious accusation," Jasper said. His voice had changed. "It's what I believe happened," Ethan said. "You can tell me I'm wrong." Another silence. Longer this time. Clara stood in the kitchen doorway and held still. "She showed up from nowhere," Jasper said, and his voice now had a different texture, not controlled, not performing concern, something raw and less considered. "A woman with no connections, no money, no nothing, and within 2 hours she's got herself installed in your house. You don't find that convenient. You don't wonder what she's working toward." "I don't," Ethan said. "You're too trusting." "Or I'm a decent judge of character," Ethan said. "And the character I'm looking at right now is making me uneasy." A chair moved, someone shifting weight. Clara pressed her back against the kitchen wall. "She's going to take what's yours," Jasper said. "Women like her." "Be very careful," Ethan said. "Very quiet, very still." Jasper caught it. Even from the kitchen, Clara could hear him catch at that particular note in Ethan's voice, low and level, the way the sky goes low and level before weather. "I'm saying this as family," Jasper said, pulling it back. "I know you are." Ethan's voice hadn't moved. "And I'm saying this as the man whose name is on every deed in this county and who has not asked you for advice about how to run his life since we were boys. You will stop the letters. You will stop the conversations. You will stop going to pastors and school boards with stories about a woman you have met exactly once." "Ethan, I'm not finished." A pause that had real weight in it. "If you've got a concern about the ranch or about what happens to it, you speak to me. Directly. To my face. Not through clergy and not through rumor. That's the only conversation I'm willing to have with you about any of this." Jasper said nothing. "We clear?" Ethan said. A long moment. Then, "We're clear." "Good." Boots on the floor. "Get back to town safe." The front door closed. Hoofbeats fading in the yard. Clara stood in the kitchen doorway and let out a breath she had been holding for a long time. Ethan came into the kitchen. He stopped when he saw her. "You heard that," he said. "I heard it." He looked at her for a moment, and she looked at him, and neither of them said anything for a time that was long enough to be its own kind of conversation. "He won't stop," she said. "Not for good. He pulled back tonight because you pressed him, but men like that don't stop." "No," Ethan said. "They don't. So what happens next?" He pulled out a chair and sat down at the kitchen table. His kitchen table in his kitchen, which had somehow stopped feeling entirely like his over the last 2 weeks and had started feeling like somewhere two people lived, which was something he hadn't had in a very long time. "The pastor's writing to Harrow Valley tomorrow," he said. "If that comes through, you've got a position and a reason to be here that's entirely your own, independent of me. And if it doesn't..." He looked at the table, at his hands, at some point on the wood grain that wasn't really the point he was looking at. "Then we figure out something else," he said. "Together." Clara sat down across from him. The lamp was low between them. Outside the mountain, dark was complete, the stars closed the way they get at elevation, the way they'd never gotten in Denver. "I played your mother's organ today," she said. "The diapason stop. I think she used to use it for hymns." He looked up. "It has that kind of voice," Clara said. "Like it's not just filling the room, like it's speaking to someone specific." He was quiet for a moment. "She played every Sunday morning," he said. "Same 3 hymns in rotation. I could tell you the order she played them in." "Tell me." He looked at her surprised. "Tell me," she said again. "What order?" And for the first time since she had come to the Cole Ranch, Ethan Cole sat at his kitchen table in the mountain dark and talked about his mother, not the fact of her loss, not the weight of it, but the living of her, the actual Sunday morning woman who played the organ in a particular order and had opinions about casseroles and played for 3 hours after the worst week of her life and didn't say another word about it. Clara listened. She asked questions where questions opened things further. She did not try to fill the silences. It was, she thought, the most honest hour she had spent with another person in over a year. And it was Jasper Doss, with all his scheming and his letters and his territorial calculations, who had made it necessary. Who had forced Ethan to speak plainly and forced Clara to stop being polite and careful and begin being real. She almost wanted to thank him. Almost. The letter from Harrow Valley came on a Thursday. Clara was in the kitchen when Doyle brought it up, and she recognized the handwriting on the envelope. Same careful script as the first letter, same school board seal pressed into the wax, and she stood there holding it for a long moment before she opened it. She had learned in the past 2 weeks to prepare herself for paper. Paper had a way of changing things. She broke the seal. "Dear Mrs. Whitmore, following a communication from Reverend Marsh on your behalf and a subsequent review of your references, which we find to be entirely satisfactory, we are pleased to offer you the position of music instructor for the Harrow Valley Community School, commencing the first Monday of September. The position includes a modest stipend of $18 monthly and room and board, with the Alderman family, established members of our community who have housed our instructors for 11 years. She read it through twice. Then she set it on the kitchen table and sat down and pressed both hands flat against the wood, the way she had against that hotel post on the first day. Except this time, it wasn't because she was trying not to cry from fear. It was because she was trying not to cry from something else entirely, and she wasn't sure she had a name for it yet. She had a position. She had a stipend. She had a room with the Alderman family. She had somewhere to go. She should have felt only relief. She waited for it, that clean, uncomplicated wave of relief, and what came instead was more complicated, and she didn't examine it too closely because she was afraid of what she'd find. She went to find Ethan. He was at the corral with the young gelding, the spooked one he'd been working patiently for 3 weeks, and the horse was letting him get close now without shying, not all the way calm, but building toward it. Clara came to the fence rail and waited. Ethan acknowledged her with a slight tilt of his head, but didn't stop what he was doing, and she appreciated the fact that he finished the thing he was doing before he came to her, because it meant, when he turned to face her, he was fully present. "Letter from Harrow Valley," she said. He read her face before she handed him the paper. "Good news or bad?" "Good." She held it out. "They've offered me the position. September 1st. He took the letter. He read it. He handed it back. "That's good," he said. His voice was even, fully controlled in the way she had come to recognize as meaning the opposite of emptiness. "I'll need to leave by the end of the month," she said, "to give myself time to settle before the term begins." "That's sensible." She looked at the gelding, who was watching her with the suspicious attention of an animal that has learned caution. "I wanted you to know as soon as I did." "I appreciate that." A pause. The horse moved, dust in the yard. "Ethan," she said. "Clara." They both stopped. He had not used her first name before, not once, in nearly 3 weeks, and the sound of it in his voice, just those 2 syllables said, plainly caught her somewhere between her collarbone and her sternum, and stayed there. "I'm going to repay every cent in the ledger," she said, "as soon as I have the first month's stipend." "I know you will." "And the organ, I want you to keep playing it. Or have someone play it. It shouldn't sit quiet again." Something moved across his face. "I'll keep that in mind." She turned to walk back to the house. She had made it about 6 steps when he said, "Clara." She stopped. "Stay through August," he said. "September 1st is the commitment. August is still yours." She turned around. He was standing at the corral fence with his arms resting on the top rail. The gelding behind him, the mountains behind everything. And he was looking at her the way he sometimes did, when he had thought something through, all the way to its end, and decided to say it anyway. "All right," she said. She went back to the house and sat down at the organ and played for a long time. Oh, the news reached Cordell before Doyle even made his next supply run. Francis told Clara later that Mabel Greer had somehow gotten wind of it, a thing Francis attributed to the fact that Mabel Greer had informants in places no reasonable person expected, and by Friday afternoon the word was out that the widow from Denver had secured a proper teaching position in Harrow Valley. The town's response was in its own way instructive. Some people revised their opinions. Not dramatically, not with any fanfare, but in the quiet way of people who have been waiting for evidence to fall on one side or another. Harrow Valley's school board was respectable. Their vetting was known to be thorough. And the fact that Clara Whitmore had passed it said something that Jasper Doss's insinuations hadn't managed to unsay. Others doubled down. These were mostly people in Jasper's social orbit, people who had committed publicly enough to the suspicion that retreat would cost them something. And Jasper himself went very quiet, which Clara had learned by now was when he was most dangerous. She was aware of his silence the way you're aware of weather that hasn't broken yet. She felt it in the back of her neck on Sunday when she went to church in Cordell. For the first time, Ethan drove her, sat beside her in the pew, and did not look at the people who looked at them, and Jasper was not there, which should have been a relief and wasn't. Pastor Neil preached about charity that morning. He didn't look at Clara specifically, but he didn't avoid looking at her either, which was its own kind of adjustment. After the service, Ruth Calloway, the 64-year-old woman who had lived in Cordell before it was Cordell, came up to Clara in the churchyard and took her hand in both of hers. "I hear you got yourself a position at Harrow Valley," Ruth said. "I did, ma'am. Good school." Ruth had sharp eyes under a soft face, and she was using both right now. "You play that organ at the Cole Ranch?" "I restored it, and I play it, yes." "Eleanor Cole would have liked that." A pause. "She was a friend of mine for 30 years. She loved that instrument the way some women love children." Ruth squeezed her hand once and let go. "You come to church anytime you want. You sit where you like." It was in the arithmetic of small frontier towns, an enormous statement. Clara understood that. She thanked her with genuine warmth and watched the old woman walk away with the authority of someone who has been somewhere long enough to own it. Ethan had watched the exchange from 10 feet away. When Clara came back to his side, he said, "Ruth Calloway just gave you the town." "She gave me a corner of it," Clara said. "In Cordell, that's the same thing." It was Frances who first noticed that something had shifted between them. She came to the house on the following Tuesday with mending she'd offered to do, on the condition that she could use Clara's better scissors, which was an excuse, and both women knew it, and neither said so. They sat at the kitchen table, while the morning burned off outside, and Frances mended, and Clara reviewed her teaching materials for September, and they talked the way women talk when they've decided to be honest with each other, which is not always about the thing they're talking about. "He whistles now," Frances said without looking up from her needle. Clara looked up from her papers. "I beg your pardon?" "Ethan. He whistles when he's working. He didn't used to." Frances bit her thread. "Doyle noticed it first. He mentioned it to me. I told him to mind his business, but it's true." Clara looked back at her papers. "He also came in for the midday meal 4 times last week." Frances continued her needle going again. "Before you arrived, he sometimes didn't stop until dark." Frances. "I'm just noting facts." "You're noting them quite strategically." Frances allowed herself a small smile. "I'm a foreman's wife. Strategy is a professional requirement." She folded the mended cloth. "How are you feeling about leaving?" "I'm glad to have this position," Clara said. "It's what I came here for. It's what I worked toward." "That's not what I asked." Clara set down her papers and looked at Frances directly. "I know what you're asking." "Then answer it." A long pause. Outside from somewhere across the yard, a sound not exactly whistling, but close. A man doing something with his hands and letting some interior brightness leak out without meaning to. Clara heard it. She felt Frances hear it too. "It doesn't matter what I'm feeling," Clara said. "What matters is that I have a position, and I will go and be useful there, and I will not be a burden on a man who has already been generous beyond any reasonable expectation." "Clara Whitmore," Frances said, and her voice had lost its wry edge and become something more direct. "That is the most sensible and the most unnecessary sentence you have said since I've known you." Frances. "He hasn't asked anyone to stay in 11 years?" Frances said. "Not since Margaret Connolly went back east." "He asked you to stay through August. Do you understand what that means, coming from a man who has not said a personal thing to another person in the better part of a decade?" Clara was quiet. "I'm not telling you to stay," Frances said. "Harrow Valley is a good position, and you've earned it. I'm telling you that the situation is more particular than you may be allowing yourself to see." "I can see it perfectly," Clara said, and her voice was steady. "That's why I'm allowing myself to see it very carefully." Frances looked at her for a moment. Then she picked up the next mending and said nothing more, and the two women sat in the kitchen while the sound of a man working and the intermittent thread of something that might have been music came in through the open window. That evening, Ethan came in earlier than usual. Clara was at the organ she played every evening. Now it had become the rhythm of the house, the hour after supper, when the heat finally broke and the light went long and golden, and she sat at the keyboard and played whatever was in her, and she heard his boots on the step, and then silence, which meant he'd stopped in the doorway. She kept playing. She had stopped finding his listening intrusive about a week ago, somewhere around the time she'd admitted to herself that she played differently when she knew he was there. Not worse, not performed, just fuller somehow. Like the sound had somewhere to go. "What's that?" he said. "Schubert, an impromptu. I learned it when I was 16 and it stayed with me." He came into the room. He didn't sit. He stood where he sometimes stood near the cold fireplace, where he could hear without it feeling like he was watching. "It sounds like an argument," he said. She almost stopped playing. "What?" "The music. It sounds like two things arguing with each other, like they can't decide which way to go." She played through another passage before she answered. "That's a more accurate description of Schubert than most people manage," she said. "He never quite resolves things. He keeps returning to the tension." "Doesn't that frustrate you?" "It used to," she said. "Now I think it's honest." She finished the piece. The last chord sat in the room for a moment, unresolved the way Schubert meant it. Ethan crossed the room and sat down in the chair near the organ the first time she realized that he had sat in that chair. He had been standing always in doorways at distances. Now he pulled the chair a few feet from the keyboard and sat. "Play something else," he said. She looked at him. "What would you like?" "Something that resolves," he said. She almost smiled. She turned back to the keyboard and she played not Schubert, not anything formal, just a melody that found its way home at the end, something her mother had taught her before she had words for what music was, and it moved through the room like something that had been held back and was finally allowed. When she finished, the silence that followed was different from the usual silence, fuller, like the room had inhaled. "Clara," he said. She kept her hands on the keys. "Ethan, when you go to Harrow Valley..." He stopped, started again. "I want you to know that whatever you need from here, reference a letter, anything practical, you have it. Anything I can do." "I know that," she said softly. "And I want you to know." Another pause. This one longer. She heard him work through something the way she'd heard him work through the business with Jasper, the way he thought carefully before he said a hard thing. "I want you to know that the house is going to be quiet again." And I had forgotten what quiet cost. She turned on the stool to face him. He was looking at his hands, which was unusual for him. He generally looked at things directly, and she understood that this was as exposed as he was likely to allow himself to be. "I had too," she said. He looked up. "I came here with nothing," she said. "And I've been so focused on repairing that on the ledger, the letters, the position proving I wasn't a burden, that I almost didn't notice what else was happening." She looked at him steadily. "I'm going to miss this. I'm going to miss you. And I wanted you to know I'm aware of that before I go." He held her gaze for a long time. "September 1st, he said. "September 1st, she agreed. What came after that was silence, but it wasn't the old silence, the waiting empty kind that had lived in the house for 6 years. It was something else, the kind that happens between two people who have said enough. The last week of August moved fast and slow at the same time, the way the final chapter of a hard book does. Clara packed her trunk a little at a time. Not all at once. She couldn't bring herself to do it all at once, and she folded her dresses and her teaching books and her sheet music, and returned the kitchen to exactly the order she'd found it in, and she wrote a clean final page in the ledger, and left it on the table with a note that said, "Balance to be settled from first month's stipend delivered by post. C.W." She played the organ every evening. Sometimes Ethan sat in the chair nearby. Sometimes she could hear him outside on the porch, which was its own kind of listening. Once on a Wednesday night, with the August heat finally thinning towards something that almost felt like fall, she heard him come in very quietly and sit down while she was already mid-piece, and she played for an hour without stopping, moving from one thing to the next. And when she finally let her hands rest, he said from the chair, "That last one, what was that?" "Something I wrote," she said. She hadn't meant to say it. "When?" She was quiet. Here. This summer. He didn't say anything else, but she felt the quality of his silence change. On Friday, 3 days before she was due to leave, Jasper Doss came back. He didn't ride this time. He came with a buggy, which meant he was dressed, which meant he had somewhere to be, or wanted to appear that he did. He drove into the yard mid-afternoon, while Ethan was on the north pasture and Clara was on the front porch reading, and he stepped down from the buggy and looked at her with an expression she had not seen on him before. He looked uncertain. She stood up. "Mr. Doss." "Mrs. Whitmore." He took his hat off, which he had never done before. "I heard you got the Harrow Valley position." "I did." "And you're leaving Monday." "That's right." He stood there in the yard holding his hat. The horse was still. The whole afternoon was still. "I owe you an apology," he said. She did not move. She was not sure she had heard correctly. "The letters," he said. "The ones to the school boards, that was out of line. Ethan told me straight and he was right." He turned the hat in his hands. "I had my reasons, and they're my reasons, not yours, and you didn't deserve to have them land on you." Clara looked at him for a long moment. She had spent a considerable part of the last month being angry at this man, and the anger was real and warranted, and she wasn't going to pretend otherwise. "You cost me the first Harrow Valley application," she said. "I had to wait for the pastor's letter to get the second." "I know. That was 2 weeks of uncertainty I didn't need." "I know that too." He met her eyes. "I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm asking you to understand that I'm saying this because it's right to say it, not because I want something from it." Clara studied him. She had a good eye for sincerity, had developed it through necessity in the years after James died, when she'd needed to know quickly which people meant what they said. Jasper Doss on this afternoon, standing in the yard with his hat in his hands, was not performing. He was a man who had looked at something he did and found it ugly, and was trying to account for it in the only way available to him. "All right," she said. "I hear you, Mr. Doss." He nodded. He put his hat back on. "Is Ethan on the property?" "North pasture." "I'll find him." He drove the buggy around toward the back of the property. Clara sat back down on the porch and picked up her book and did not read a single word of it. When Ethan came back to the house an hour later, he stopped at the porch step and looked at her. "You talked to Jasper," he said. "He came while you were out. What did he say to you?" "That he owed me an apology." She paused. "And that his reasons were his own and not mine to carry." Ethan was quiet. He sat down on the porch step, not in a chair, on the step itself, which was lower than where she was sitting, and something about that, about his willingness to be at a different level, struck her. "What did you say to him?" he asked. "That I heard him." "Not that you forgave him." "I don't forgive things easily," she said. "I wasn't raised to give forgiveness without meaning it." She looked at the yard, at the mountains beyond. "But I don't carry things forever either. That's just weight." He was quiet for a moment. "What did he say to me?" "I don't know. He went to find you." "What did he say?" Ethan leaned his arms on his knees and looked out at the same mountains. "He said he'd been thinking about the land wrong, that he'd been thinking about it like something to be inherited rather than something to be worked for, and that had made him small." He paused. "He said he was sorry." "Did you believe him?" "I believed that he meant it today." A pause. Jasper has a talent for meaning things in the moment. Whether it holds is a different question. "He's family," Clara said. "He's blood," Ethan said, the same distinction he'd made before. "I keep having to remind myself of the difference." She looked at the side of his face, at the line of his jaw, the slight furrow at his brow that she had come to recognize as him, thinking something through carefully. She had learned so many of his faces without meaning to. The concentration face, the amused face that he almost never let out fully, the face he made when the gelding did something right. "Ethan," she said, "what happens to the gelding when I leave?" He turned to look at her, caught by the question. "What do you mean?" "You've been working with him all summer. He trusts you now. He's not finished, but he's close." She paused. "I've been watching you with him. You don't rush it. You give him exactly the time he needs, and not an hour more. He's a horse. I know he's a horse, she said. I'm not talking about the horse. He held her gaze. Something shifted in the air between them, the kind of shift that is small in physical terms and enormous in every other way. Clara, he said very quietly. Don't say something careful, she said. You've been careful for 37 days. I think we've both been careful enough. He turned on the step to face her more fully. His hands were on his knees, and he looked at her the way he looked at the mountains, sometimes like something that was both entirely familiar and completely beyond knowing, and he said, I don't want you to go. The words sat between them plain and irreversible, the kind of thing that once said cannot be taken back or reframed. I have a position, she said. I have a commitment. I know. I can't stay here without a purpose of my own. You understand that. I do understand it. And I don't want... She stopped, tried again. I don't want what happened to Margaret Connolly. I don't want to come here for someone else and find out too late that I needed to come for myself. He was very still. Who told you about Margaret? Francis. I asked. He nodded slowly. What did Francis tell you? That she was a good woman who was honest enough to know this life wasn't for her, and that you parted without unkindness. She looked at him directly. I'm not Margaret Connolly. I'm not afraid of hard country or high mountains or silence or any of the things that might push a person back east. I was a music teacher in a borrowed parlor for a year, and I was slowly disappearing. She paused. I haven't disappeared once since I arrived here. He was watching her with an intensity that was entirely still. But I need the position, she said. I need to know I can do this on my own. Not because you gave me a house and a key and the benefit of your name in difficult conversations. On my own. I know, he said. September 1st, she said. September 1st. He agreed. They sat on the porch in the late August afternoon, while the light moved and the horses were quiet in the corral, and the mountains held their shape against the sky the way they always had and always would. When does the term end? He said. She looked at him. December. There's a winter break of 2 weeks. Harrow Valley's 12 miles. 12 miles, she confirmed. Pause. He looked at the yard. A long pause. A slow nod. The kind that means a decision has been made without all the words to support it needing to be said out loud. I'll have Doyle fix the north fence before the cold comes, he said. It's been needing it. That's very practical of you, she said. I'm a practical man. She turned back to her book. She still wasn't reading it. She didn't need to. On Sunday morning, 2 days before she was to leave, something happened that none of them anticipated. Ruth Calloway came to the coal ranch. She came in a wagon driven by her nephew, and she was dressed in her church clothes, and she carried a box that she handed to Ethan at the front door, with the gravity of someone delivering something long held. Eleanor left this with me, Ruth said. About 2 weeks before she died. She said to give it to whoever needed it next. She was specific about that, whoever needs it next. She didn't say, keep it for family. She said, whoever needs it next. Ethan took the box. He looked at it. What's in it? He said. Open it. He brought it inside. Clara was at the kitchen table. Ruth came in and stood near the door, her nephew waiting outside, and Ethan set the box on the table and opened it. Inside, wrapped in a piece of muslin, was a packet of letters. And underneath the letters, a small notebook, the cover worn smooth with handling written through in a hand Clara did not recognize. Ethan recognized it. She could tell by the way he went still. Her handwriting, he said. Not a question. She kept a journal, Ruth said. The last 2 years of her life. She told me what she wanted done with it, and I've been waiting for the right time. A pause. I think the time is now. Ethan picked up the notebook. He held it in both hands, and something moved across his face that was so unguarded, Clara felt she was witnessing something she shouldn't and looked away. "Ruth," he said, "why now?" The old woman looked at him with the clear-eyed directness of someone who has known someone for 30 years and past the point of delicacy. "Because she's leaving Monday," Ruth said, "and you're going to let her go without saying what needs to be said, and Eleanor would not have stood for it." The kitchen went very quiet. Clara looked at Ruth. Ruth looked at Ethan. Ethan looked at the notebook in his hands. "That's a considerable intervention," he said. "Eleanor was a considerable woman," Ruth said. "I'm doing my best to honor that." She looked at Clara. She wrote about the ranch, about what she hoped for it, about what she wanted this house to be. A pause. "I think you should read it, both of you." She turned and walked out. The front door closed. The sound of the wagon moving away came and faded. Ethan stood at the kitchen table with the notebook in his hands and looked at Clara. Clara looked back at him. "You don't have to share that with me," she said. "It's private." "Ruth brought it here on purpose," he said. "She doesn't do things without purpose. She's trying to help. She's succeeding," he said, and he set the notebook down between them on the table and pulled out a chair and sat. And after a moment, Clara pulled out her own chair across from him, and they sat together at the kitchen table with Eleanor Cole's journal between them, while the Sunday morning moved around them, and Ethan opened the cover and began to read. Ethan read the first page of his mother's journal out loud. He hadn't planned to. He'd opened the cover, meaning to read it privately, the way you read something that belongs to the person you were before you became who you are now. But the first line came out of him before he could stop it, because it was in her voice, completely, entirely, unmistakably her, and once he heard it in the air, he couldn't take it back. August 12th. The organ needs tuning again. I've been playing the Vox Humana stop too hard, and the reed is going sharp. Ethan doesn't notice. He notices everything about this land, and almost nothing about music, which is fine. I didn't raise him to be me. I raised him to be better at the things I couldn't do. He stopped. Clara was very still across the table. He turned the page. August 19th. Ruth came today. We talked about what happens after. I told her I'm not afraid of the dying part. I'm afraid of the quiet part. The house going quiet. Ethan rattling around in it alone, being practical about everything, because that's how he survives. Hard things being practical until the hard thing passes, except some hard things don't pass, they just become the weather. He set the notebook down. He looked at the table. "She knew," he said. "She was your mother," Clara said. "Mothers generally know." He picked it up again. He didn't read out loud this time. He read to himself, and Clara sat across from him and didn't try to fill the silence. And that was exactly right. That was the thing about her that had been exactly right from the first week she knew when silence was the correct response, and she gave it without making it feel like absence. He read for 20 minutes. He turned pages carefully, as if the paper were something that could be damaged by urgency. Clara watched his face not intrusively, just honestly, the way you watch someone you care about when they're moving through something hard, and you want to be present without being in the way. When he finally set the notebook down again, his face had the look of a man who has had something confirmed that he had not admitted to hoping for. "There's a passage," he said, "near the end." He found the page. He read it to himself first, then looked up at Clara. "She writes about the house. She says—" He stopped, steadied himself. "She says a house that's only ever held one person isn't really a home. It's just a shelter. The difference is in the living. A home gets made by people choosing it over and over on the hard days, as much as the easy ones. I want Ethan to have a home, not a shelter. He deserves a home." The kitchen was entirely quiet. "She wrote that 2 weeks before she died," Ethan said. "I know," Clara said softly. "She didn't know you." "No. But she knew someone like you would have to exist, or the house would just be—" He stopped. "A shelter," Clara finished. He looked at her across the table. Everything between them that had been careful and managed and properly spaced was still there, but it had become transparent like glass, that you could finally see through clearly to what was on the other side. "Clara," he said. "Ethan." She kept her hands flat on the table. "I leave Monday. That hasn't changed." "I know, and I need you to hear me when I say that I need to go. Not because I want to leave, because I need to prove something to myself that I can't prove from inside your house." "I hear you," he said. "I've always heard you." "Good." She looked at the notebook. "May I read it? Not now, before I go. I'd like to know her." He slid the notebook across the table toward her without hesitation, which was, she thought, the most trusting thing he had done since he handed her the key. She read Eleanor Cole's journal that night alone in the bedroom, with the lamp turned up, sitting cross-legged on the bed, with her back against the headboard, the way she had sat reading since she was a girl. She read every page. Eleanor Cole had been a particular kind of woman, direct, deeply feeling, not easily fooled, fiercely loyal to the people she loved, and permanently finished with the ones who proved themselves unworthy of it. She wrote about the ranch with a physical love that was almost startling, not sentimental, not romanticized, but earned through decades of actual labor and actual loss. She wrote about Ethan with the careful, honest love of a mother who sees her child clearly and loves him not despite that clarity, but because of it. "He is too alone," she wrote in an entry from the previous autumn. "And he has made peace with it, the way a man makes peace with a wound, not by healing it, but by learning to work around it. I'm afraid that when I'm gone, he'll just work around it harder. He'll be fine. He'll always be fine. That's what worries me most." Clara read that and had to put the notebook down for a moment and look at the ceiling. She read the last entry. It was short. October 3rd. "I'm keeping this short because the long version is in the letters and the long version isn't for me to say anyway. I want this house to sing again. That's all. I want whoever comes here, and someone will come, because good things don't stay empty forever. That's not how the world works, no matter how it looks on the hard days. I want whoever comes to understand that this place was built for living in. Not for keeping. For living in. For music in the kitchen, and dirt on the boots, and someone to argue with over supper. That's all a home is. I hope Ethan finds that. I think he will." Clara closed the notebook. She held it in her lap in the dark for a long time. She was not the sentimental kind, she never had been. Not even when James died. She had grieved hard and fast, and then gotten up and dealt with what was in front of her, because sentiment without action was just weight. But Eleanor Cole's last entry sat in her chest like something warm and permanent, like something that had always been there waiting to be recognized. She set the notebook on the bedside table. She turned out the lamp. She lay in the dark and listened to the mountain night and thought about the difference between a shelter and a home. She thought about it for a long time before she slept. Monday morning came the way final mornings do, too fast and too slow simultaneously, and with a quality of light that seems designed to make things harder. Clara was up before dawn. She dressed quietly, made the bed with the same clean precision she'd brought to it the first night, and carried her trunk to the front room. She had already said goodbye to Frances the evening before, because she had known that saying it in the morning would be more than she could manage with her face composed. Frances had hugged her, the way a woman hugs someone she intends to see again, and told her that Harrow Valley was lucky, and that 12 miles was nothing, and that she should write. Doyle was taking her in the wagon. He was waiting in the yard when she came out, patient and unhurried the way he did most things. Ethan was at the corral. He had his back to her when she came down the steps, standing at the fence, with his forearms resting on the top rail, looking at the gelding. The horse was close to the fence now, not pressed against it, but choosing nearness, which was different. 3 months of patient work, and the animal had learned that this man's presence meant safety. She walked to the corral fence and stood beside him. Neither of them said anything for a moment. "He's going to be all right," she said. The gelding. "He is," Ethan agreed. "You did that. You gave him enough time and enough consistency, and you didn't push. That's all it takes mostly." "I know." She looked at the horse. "I wanted to say something before I go, and I've been trying to find the right words for it since about 4 this morning." "Take your time." She almost smiled. You say that to the horse too, don't you? When it's warranted. She turned to face him. He turned to face her. The morning was gold and clear, and the mountains were doing the thing they did with the early light, going from purple to something that didn't have a name, and she wasn't going to look at them because she was going to look at him. Thank you, she said. Not for the house or the key or the practical things, though those mattered. Thank you for the way you handled all of it. The way you went to the pastor and came home and told me straight. The way you sat in that chair and listened. The way you never once made me feel like a problem to be managed. She paused. I was someone's problem for a long time after James died, and then I was my own problem, and this is the first place in 2 years where I have not felt like a problem. He was listening, fully completely the way he listened to the horse, not waiting for his turn to speak, just receiving. Your mother would have liked you very much, she said. I want you to know I think that. Something moved through his face. She would have liked you, he said. She would have liked you considerably. I know, Clara smiled. I read her journal. Read her. He made a sound that was almost a laugh, the closest she had heard him get to one, a warm, involuntary sound. She was not subtle. No, she was not. Clara looked at the gelding, who was watching them both, with that calm, curious attention that horses get when they've learned to trust. I'll write when I'm settled. I'd like that. And in December? 12 miles, he said. 12 miles. She agreed. He reached out and took her hand. Not in the way of assistance, not helping her over a step or into a wagon, just taking her hand and holding it. His large, work-roughened, entirely honest hand wrapped around hers, and she held on back, and they stood there at the corral fence for a moment that was brief in real time and completely sufficient. Then she let go. She turned. She walked to the wagon, and Doyle helped her up, and she settled on the seat and looked forward toward the road, toward Harrow Valley, toward September, and the work and the life that was hers to make. She did not look back until the wagon had covered a quarter mile. When she did, Ethan Cole was still at the corral fence. He had his hand on this gelding's neck, which had come to him finally fully choosing to be there. And he was watching the wagon until she turned forward again and let the distance take him. Harrow Valley was everything the letter had promised, and several things it hadn't mentioned. The Alderman family was exactly as established and respectable as advertised. Gerald Alderman ran the feed store, and his wife Nora ran the household, with the brisk, warm efficiency of a woman who has been doing things right for so long that rightness is simply how she moves through the world. They had housed teachers before, and they knew how to make a person feel like a guest, who was also genuinely welcome, which is harder than it sounds. Nora showed Clara her room, which had a window that faced east, and a small desk and a lamp with a good chimney. It was a fine room. The school itself needed work. Not the building was in reasonable shape, but the program. The previous music instructor had left abruptly in June, and in the gap, there had been no lessons at all for 3 months, and the children were consequently a mixed collection of half-formed habits and unrealized potential, which was, Clara thought, exactly the condition she knew how to address. She threw herself into it. That was the correct word, threw the full weight of herself the way she had not been able to throw herself into anything since James died. She organized the children by ability, and not by age, which caused some initial protest from parents, and some eventual grudging acknowledgement that it was working. She repaired the school's old upright piano herself. She had the tools and the knowledge, and it was faster than waiting. And she wrote to Denver for sheet music, and she started a small choir that met on Wednesday evenings that began with 6 children, and by the 3rd week had 14. She was useful. She was competent. She was exactly who she had always been, and she was doing it entirely on her own. And every evening when she sat at the alderman's dinner table, and Gerald asked how the day had gone, she could answer with the specific and real detail of a person whose day had actually meant something. She wrote to Francis first. A long letter full of the practical details of settling in with a postscript that asked Francis to tell her how the gelding was coming along. Francis wrote back in 10 days with a letter that was half practical information and half unnecessary observation. The gelding was doing well. Doyle had fixed the north fence. Ethan had ridden into Cordell on Thursday for the first time without a supply reason, which was notable. He had stopped at the post office. Clara read that last line 3 times and then wrote a letter to Ethan. She wrote it carefully. Not performed, not managed the way she had written to school boards, but honestly the way she'd talked to him at the corral fence. She told him about the children and the upright piano and the Wednesday choir. She told him that Nora Alderman's biscuits were better than anything she'd managed in his kitchen, and that she considered this a significant achievement for Nora to brag about. She told him the east window made the mornings easier. She told him she'd been thinking about his mother's journal, about the line that said, "A home gets made by people choosing it on the hard days as much as the easy ones." She did not write the part she was still working out in herself. That could wait for December. She sent the letter on a Friday. His reply came the following Wednesday, which meant he had written back the same day he received it. She recognized that, and felt it somewhere in her chest, and read the letter at the alderman's kitchen table, with Nora conspicuously busy at the opposite counter. His letter was shorter than hers. He was not a man who wrote long, but every sentence had the quality of his speech considered direct, carrying more than it appeared to. He told her the north fence was done and had taken 3 days longer than expected due to the hardest section being rockier than Doyle had estimated. He told her the gelding had started accepting the saddle, not fully, but working toward it. He told her he had read his mother's journal twice more. The last paragraph said, "I went through the house yesterday for something I'd misplaced and found myself in every room. Some of them I haven't been in since she died. The one that looks east, I think it gets the best morning light. I never noticed that before. There are things in this house I haven't seen in 6 years because I wasn't looking. I'm looking now." Clara folded the letter. She put it in the pocket of her dress against her ribs and walked to the schoolhouse. She had a Wednesday choir to run. October moved fast and cold. The work was good, and the days were full, and she slept well, which was not nothing. She had not slept well for most of the previous 2 years. And the sleep of a person doing useful work in a life they have chosen is a different thing entirely from the sleep of exhaustion or desperation. She wrote to Ethan every week. He wrote back within 2 or 3 days every time. The letters got longer. His got longer, which she noticed without remarking on, because some things you keep to yourself until you know what to do with them. In mid-October, something happened in Cordell that reached her through Francis. Jasper Doss had gone to the bank. Not their local bank, the territorial bank in Denver, with which he had some existing relationship through a land deal he'd done 3 years prior. He had gone there according to the information Francis relayed with her usual dry neutrality to inquire about what would be required to contest a property claim on the basis of mismanagement. Clara read that letter standing up. She stayed standing for a while. She wrote to Ethan that evening, not her weekly letter, but an additional one, shorter, direct. She told him what Francis had said. She told him she thought he should know. She told him she was sorry to send that kind of news by letter rather than in person. His reply came in 4 days, which was the fastest yet. "I know about the Denver trip." Doyle heard it from the land office clerk who'd been asked to pull survey records. "Jasper's been planning this longer than we thought. He's not contesting the property. He can't. The deed is solid. But he's looking for some procedural angle. My lawyer in Denver says there's nothing actionable, but that Jasper may try to make it costly enough that I'd consider a settlement." A pause in the letter, she could feel it the way you can feel a pause in a person's voice, even in writing. "I want you to understand that this does not change anything. The ranch is mine. It has been for 11 years, and will be for as many more as I can work it. Jasper's looking for leverage, and there isn't any." And then at the bottom, in what felt like an afterthought that was not an afterthought at all, "I'll see you in December. Drive carefully if there's snow." She looked at that last line for a long time. November came in hard. The first real cold. The first snow on the high peaks, visible from the Harrow Valley schoolhouse window, the children arriving in the mornings with red noses, and the particular energy of young people who have just encountered winter for the first time that season, and find it exciting rather than miserable. Clara found it clarifying. She had a habit in the early mornings, before the children arrived, of playing the school's upright piano for 20 minutes. Not to practice, not to prepare, just to think. Music had always been how she thought, how she sorted things out, how she moved from not knowing to knowing. She played Schubert sometimes, the unresolved kind. She played the melody she'd written at Ethan's ranch, the one she hadn't meant to tell him about. She played through what she was working toward, and what she was afraid of, and what she had learned about the difference between leaving out of strength and leaving out of fear. She had left the ranch out of strength. She was sure of that now. She had needed to come here and do this work and be this woman on her own terms, and she had done it, and it was real, and it was hers. December was 3 weeks away. On the Tuesday before Thanksgiving, Gerald Alderman came to the schoolhouse at noon with a look on his face that she had learned meant he had something to tell her that he wasn't sure how to say. "There's a man at the house," he said. "Rode in about an hour ago. He didn't give his name to Nora. He said he'd wait." Something moved through her. She knew before she asked. "What does he look like?" Gerald considered. "Tall, mountain kind. Hat that's been through weather." She looked at the piano. She looked at the schoolhouse door. "I'll come now," she said. "Can someone cover the afternoon session?" Nora already told the Henderson girl, Gerald said, which meant Nora had known before Gerald did, which was entirely consistent with everything Clara had come to understand about Nora Alderman. She walked back to the house with Gerald, and he went around to the feed store with the tact of a man who has been married long enough to know when he is not needed. She went to the front door. Ethan Cole was standing in the alderman's front room with his hat in his hands and 3 weeks of November riding on him, and he turned when she came in and looked at her with the look she had been turning over in her mind since the morning she left, straight on, full. Nothing managed. "It's not December," she said. "No," he said. "It's not." "What happened?" He reached into his coat and produced a folded paper. He held it out to her. She took it. It was a legal document. She read it quickly. She had learned in the past several months to read legal documents quickly. It was a complaint filed with the territorial court by Jasper Doss, alleging that the Cole Ranch had been improperly valued in the original deed transfer from his Uncle Ethan's father, and requesting a review of the original survey records. The complaint named Ethan. It also, in a subsidiary clause that made Clara's vision sharpen, alleged that the presence of an unattached woman of unclear standing on the property during the summer months had constituted a pattern of behavior inconsistent with responsible land stewardship. She looked up from the document. "He used me," she said, "as part of the complaint." "He tried to." Ethan's voice was level. "My lawyer says it's not actionable. The complaint itself won't hold. But it's going to require a formal response, and there's going to be a hearing, and the hearing is going to require me to address the language about—" He stopped. "About the woman on the property," Clara said. "Yes." She held the document. Her hands were steady. Inside, something cold and precise was moving through her. Not anger exactly, but the hard-edged clarity that comes when a threat is real and known, and requires a response. "When is the hearing?" she said. "January 15th, Territorial Courthouse in Culver City." "That's 6 weeks." "Yes." "And what does your lawyer say you need?" Ethan looked at her. "He says the easiest resolution, the cleanest, is if the situation that Jasper characterized as improper is demonstrated to be the opposite." She looked at him. He looked at her. "Demonstrated how?" she said. He turned his hat in his hands once. "Clara, I did not come here to pressure you into anything. I want you to know that first. I know that. And I am going to fight this regardless of what you decide, because the complaint is baseless, and I have the deed and the survey records, and a lawyer who doesn't lose. I know that too. But I also—" He stopped. Started again more carefully. "I also came because I read my mother's journal for the 4th time last week. The last entry. And I thought about what she said about a home being made by people who choose it, on the hard days." He met her eyes. "This is a hard day." She looked at him for a long time. "Ethan," she said, "are you asking me to come back?" "I'm asking," he said, "if you would consider coming back, as something other than a guest." The room was entirely quiet. Outside, a November wind moved through the alderman's yard, and somewhere a door shut, and a child called to another child in the distance, and the ordinary world continued the way it does, even around moments that change everything. She thought about Eleanor Cole's journal. A home gets made by people choosing it over and over on the hard days as much as the easy ones. She thought about the east window at the ranch that Ethan had said got the best morning light. She thought about December and 12 miles, and the letter he had written so fast it must have been written the same day. She thought about the ledger, the column she'd labeled repayment. How she'd been so careful about it, so determined not to be anyone's problem, not to be carried. She had done that. She had come here and done that entirely on her own, and it was real, and it was hers, and it would remain hers regardless of what she decided next. She folded the legal document and handed it back to him. "I have a Wednesday choir," she said. 14 children who have been working for 6 weeks on a Christmas program." He waited. "I'm not leaving them before Christmas," she said. "I made a commitment." "December," he said. "December," she said. "But Ethan?" She stepped forward, and she put her hand against his chest, flat-palmed, the way she had pressed her hands against the hotel post that first day in Cordell, when she was trying not to fall apart. Except this time she was not trying to hold herself together. She was reaching toward something. "I'm not coming back to help with a legal hearing. I'm not coming back as a guest. If I come back, I come back the way your mother meant. The way she wrote about. Do you understand what I'm saying?" He put his hand over hers. The same hold as the corral fence, his large, honest hand wrapped around hers. "I understand exactly what you're saying," he said. "And you're asking for that. Not just for the hearing." "I am asking for that," he said. "Not just for the hearing." She left her hand there against his chest for a moment. She could feel his heartbeat under her palm, steady, strong, not entirely calm, which told her things she needed to know. "Stay for supper," she said. "Nora makes better biscuits than I do. You should experience that." He almost laughed. The real one, the warm, involuntary sound. "All right. And tomorrow you can ride back and tell your lawyer that the situation Jasper characterized as improper is going to look considerably more legitimate by January." "How considerably?" he said. She looked at him. The steadiness in her had nothing to do with the absence of feeling, and everything to do with knowing herself, knowing him, knowing what she had come here to prove, and the fact that she had proved it. "Considerably enough," she said. She went to tell Nora there would be an extra person for supper, and she heard behind her the quiet sound of a man letting out a breath he had been holding for 3 weeks, and she held her own heart carefully in both hands and felt it choose. Ethan stayed for supper. Nora Alderman fed him biscuits and venison stew, and asked him 3 questions about the ranch that were so specific and practical that Clara suspected Nora had been briefed on the situation by some combination of Francis and rural telegraph and her own considerable intelligence-gathering operation. Gerald came in from the feed store and shook Ethan's hand and talked about cattle prices for 20 minutes in the way men talk about neutral subjects when the real subject is too significant for a first meeting. Ethan answered every question directly, ate everything on his plate, and thanked Nora with a sincerity that made the older woman look at Clara with an expression that communicated entire paragraphs. After supper, Clara walked him to his horse. The night was cold, properly cold now, November cold, the kind that has intention, and their breath showed in the air, and the stars were the close crowded kind that come with altitude and clear sky. "You'll ride back tonight," she said. "Part of the way. I'll stop at the way station on the ridge." She looked at him. "Be careful on the pass. It freezes at night now." "I know the road." "I know you do." She paused. "Ethan, when you get home, when you talk to your lawyer, tell him the full situation, all of it. Don't manage it." He looked at her. "What do you mean?" "I mean that Jasper built his complaint on implication, on suggesting something that looked like one thing and was another. Your best answer to implication is clarity." She held his gaze. "Full clarity. Tell your lawyer everything and let him work with the truth. The truth is better than Jasper's version." He was quiet for a moment. "You've been thinking about this," Since I read the complaint. She crossed her arms against the cold. He called me a woman of unclear standing. That's the phrase, unclear standing. She let that sit for a moment. By January, I intend my standing to be entirely clear. He looked at her the way he had in the front room, straight on, nothing managed. Clara. Go home, Ethan. Ride carefully. Write me when you're back. He put his boot in the stirrup and swung up. He settled in the saddle and looked down at her, and the moonlight was enough to see his face by, and his face was doing something she recognized now as the expression he wore when he had decided something completely. December, he said. December, she said. He turned the horse and rode into the dark. She stood until the hoofbeats faded. Then she went back inside where Nora was already making tea and not pretending she hadn't been watching through the kitchen window. Sit down, Nora said, setting a cup in front of her. Tell me about the legal situation. Clara sat down. She told her. Nora listened without interrupting, which was the mark of a woman who understood that some information needed to be delivered complete before it could be assessed. When Clara finished, Nora said, This Jasper Doss sounds like a man who has never been told no clearly enough or early enough. That's an accurate summary, Clara said. And the hearing is January 15th. Yes. That gives you 6 weeks. Nora wrapped both hands around her own cup. The choir program is December 20th. You'd leave after Christmas. I think so, yes. Nora nodded, the brisk, conclusive nod of a woman checking items off an internal list. Gerald knows the territorial court clerk in Culver City. They were in the same regiment. I'll have him write a letter. Clara looked at her. You don't need to do that. No, Nora agreed. I don't need to. I'm going to. She looked at Clara over the rim of her cup. You're a good teacher, Mrs. Whitmore. The best we've had. I'll be sorry to lose you in December. I haven't said I'm leaving in December. No, Nora said again. You haven't said it. She set down her cup. But you played that unresolved Schubert for 6 weeks, and this week you've been playing things that finish. Clara looked at the table. I notice music, Nora said simply. It's a small house. The next 6 weeks had a particular quality, urgent and tender, at the same time the way the last weeks of anything you've chosen to love fully tend to be. Clara finished the term. She ran the Wednesday choir through 4 more rehearsals, and the children were ready. Not perfect. No children's choir is ever perfect, but ready in the way that mattered, the way of young people who have worked at something until it means something to them. She wrote lesson plans for her replacement. She wrote detailed notes on each child's ability and habit, and the particular thing each one needed to hear to keep going when the work got hard. She wrote to Ethan twice a week now. He wrote back within 2 days every time. His letters had changed, not in length. He was never going to be a long letter writer, but in texture. He wrote about the ranch with a different quality, more specific, more attentive to detail. The way a person describes a place they are seeing freshly because they are imagining showing it to someone else. He wrote about the gelding who was fully accepting the saddle now and had started to show a quality of intelligence that Ethan said reminded him of the best horse his father had ever owned. He wrote about the east bedroom, how he'd found his mother's curtains in the cedar chest and put them up, and the way the morning light came through them. She read that one 3 times. She also, in the 3rd week of November, received a letter from Ruth Calloway. Ruth wrote the way she spoke plainly, with the authority of someone who has earned the right to say things directly. She wrote that Jasper's complaint had caused a certain amount of conversation in Cordell, and that the conversation had not gone the way Jasper intended. She wrote that Pastor Neil had said publicly at a Wednesday prayer meeting that in his assessment, Clara Whitmore was a woman of complete integrity, and that the characterization in the legal complaint did not reflect the facts as he understood them. She wrote that Harold Biggs, of all people, had told 3 separate people at the barber shop that he'd heard Ethan Cole's lawyer was going to take Jasper apart at the hearing, and that he, Harold, had always thought Jasper was working an angle. At the bottom of the letter, Ruth wrote, Mabel Greer told me last week that she thinks Ethan Cole has looked different lately. More present, she said. I told her I thought that was probably accurate and none of her business. But I'm telling you because it is yours. Clara folded that letter and put it with Ethan's letters in the box she kept in the drawer of the small desk by the east window. The Wednesday before Christmas, the choir performed. 14 children in the Harrow Valley Community Hall, some of them in boots that were too big, and some of them with hair that had lost the battle against the excitement of the evening, and they sang for 40 minutes with the complete unself-conscious commitment that children bring to things they have genuinely learned. Clara played the upright piano that she had repaired herself, and she watched them and felt the particular fullness of a teacher watching students exceed what they knew they could do. Afterward, Gerald Alderman shook her hand and said she had done something real for this community, which was the highest compliment he knew how to give. Several parents came to tell her their child had been singing at home for the first time, that the child had asked if they could have a piano, that the child had said Miss Whitmore taught them that music wasn't about being perfect, it was about being honest. She had said that. In the third week of October, to a 9-year-old named Thomas, who kept stopping mid-phrase because he was afraid of hitting a wrong note. She had said the wrong note is just the right note that hasn't found its way home yet. Keep going. She had not remembered saying it. It had apparently mattered. She stayed through Christmas Day. Nora's table. Gerald's warmth, the particular comfort of a house where people have been choosing each other for a long time. On the morning of the 26th, she packed her trunk. She wrote a final letter to the school board with her full recommendations for the program's continuation. She left her lesson notes on the desk in the schoolhouse. Nora walked her out to the wagon. "You'll come back," Nora said. It was not a question. To visit. Yes. Good. Nora hugged her brisk, firm reel. "You tell that man of yours that if he doesn't treat you exactly right, he'll have Gerald to answer to." "Gerald is the gentlest man I've ever met." "I know," Nora said in a tone that suggested this made the threat more rather than less credible. "Go on. Drive carefully on the pass." Doyle had come to fetch her. Ethan had sent him, which was practical, and also told her things, and he helped her trunk into the wagon, and they drove out of Harrow Valley in the cold December morning with the mountains showing their winter faces and the road hard under the wheels. She was going home. She let herself think it plainly without qualification for the first time. She was going home. So, the ranch looked different in December. Not worse different in the way things look when you know them better when you've been carrying their image in your mind for 3 months, and the real thing is both exactly right and surprising. The main house had smoke from the chimney. The corral was empty of horses, which meant they were in the barn against the cold. The bunkhouse had light in the window. Ethan came out of the barn when the wagon came into the yard. He walked across the frozen ground toward them, without hurrying, but also without wasting a step. And when he got to the wagon, he offered her his hand, and she took it and stepped down, and they stood in the yard in the December cold, looking at each other. "You're here," he said. "I'm here," she said. "Doyle, thank you. Go get warm." Doyle, who was a man of great discretion, took the wagon around to the barn without a word. Ethan looked at her for a long moment. His face was doing the thing she had last seen on the porch of the alderman's house open, decided not performing anything. "Come inside," he said. She followed him in. The house was warm. The front room had the oil lamp turned up, and there was something on the stove that smelled like a man had put in genuine effort. She stood in the doorway of the front room and looked at the organ, which had its keys uncovered, not dusty, not neglected. The fallboard was up, and a piece of sheet music was on the stand. She walked to the organ. She looked at the music on the stand. It was the melody she had played for him in August. The one she'd written here, the one she hadn't meant to tell him about. Except this was not the version in her head, this was written out in her own hand on staff paper, and underneath the treble clef line, someone had written a second line. A bass line. A harmonic answer to her melody, careful and considered. Written in handwriting she had seen in 2 months of letters, and had come to know as well as her own. She turned to look at him. He was in the doorway leaning against the frame. "You wrote that," she said. "Francis's youngest taught me notation," he said. "It took 4 weeks." She looked back at the music. The bass line answered her melody the way a conversation answers, not echoing, not agreeing with everything, but responding, finding the harmony and holding it. "You can't play," she said. "No." He paused. "But I could hear what it needed. I've been listening to music my whole life. I just never had a reason to write any down before." She put her hand on the keys. She played the treble line, her original melody, and then she played the bass line he had written, and then she played them together, and the room filled with the sound of two people's voices finding each other in music, the way they had been finding each other in everything else. When she finished, she sat for a moment with her hands on the keys. "Ethan," she said. "Clara." She turned on the stool to face him. "The hearing is January 15th. 3 weeks. Your lawyer needs a clear statement of fact about my standing." She held his gaze. "I've been thinking about what kind of statement would be clearest." He pushed off the doorframe and came into the room. He stopped 3 feet from her, close enough to be in the same conversation, far enough to give her room. "Tell me," he said. "A wife has clear standing," she said. "Legally, socially, in every way that Jasper tried to make unclear." Ethan was very still. "Clara, I'm not proposing to you because of a legal hearing," she said firmly. "I want that to be the first thing clearly understood. I've been working toward this since November, since before he filed the complaint, since the morning I left and looked back and saw you at the corral fence." "I know that," he said. "I need you to know it." "I know it," he said again, and his voice had a certainty in it that matched hers. "The same way you know that I drove to Harrow Valley 3 weeks early, not because of the hearing." "I know," she said. They looked at each other in the lamplight, in the warm room with the music on the organ stand and the fire going, and the December outside, doing what December does in mountain country, cold and clear and permanent. "Ask me properly," she said. "I've been patient for 3 months. I'd like to be asked properly." Something happened in his face, the almost laugh again, warm and involuntary, and then past it something more serious, something that had clearly been building in him for a long time and was finally getting to be said. He reached into his coat pocket. He produced a ring, simple, a band of good silver with a small stone, not showy, not modest, exactly right. He looked at it for a moment, then at her. "This was my mother's," he said. "She left it in the cedar chest. I found it when I was hanging her curtains in the east room." He paused. "I think she left it there on purpose." Clara looked at the ring. She thought about Eleanor Cole's last journal entry. "I want whoever comes to understand that this place was built for living in." "I think she probably did," Clara said. He went down on one knee, on the front room floor of his ranch house in December. This mountain cowboy, who had learned music notation in 4 weeks for no reason except love. And he held the ring and looked up at her and said, "Clara Whitmore, I have been alone in this house for 6 years, and I told myself I was fine with it, and I was wrong. You came here with 43 cents and a trunk full of music and a key you earned yourself, and you gave this house back its voice, and you gave me back mine." He paused. "Stay, not as a guest, not as a tenant, as my wife. Because this house is yours as much as it's mine, and it has been since the day you unlocked the door." She did not hesitate. "Yes," she said. "Get up, Ethan." He got up. He put the ring on her finger. It fit exactly, which she decided not to examine too carefully, because some things are allowed to simply be right. And he held her hand for a moment, and then she stepped forward, and he put his arms around her, and she pressed her face against his chest and felt his heart beating under her ear, steady and real and entirely present. They stood like that in the lamplight for a long time. Outside, the December wind moved through the pine ridge, and the horses were quiet in the barn, and the mountains held their shape against the dark, the way they always had. Inside the house was warm. The hearing in Culver City was held on January 15th as scheduled. Jasper Doss arrived with his lawyer and his complaint and his carefully assembled narrative about mismanagement and improper conduct, and he sat at the plaintiff's table with the confidence of a man who has been building toward something for a long time. Ethan Cole arrived with his lawyer, his deed, his survey records, and his wife. Clara Whitmore. Cole sat beside Ethan at the defendant's table in a gray wool dress and her hair pinned back and her hands folded on the table in front of her, and she looked at Jasper Doss across the courtroom with the clear, untroubled eyes of a woman who has nothing to hide and knows it. Jasper looked at the ring on her hand. He looked at it for a long time. His lawyer spent 40 minutes presenting the complaint. Ethan's lawyer spent 20 minutes responding, which was 20 minutes fewer, because the truth properly organized requires less time than a fabrication. He entered the deed. He entered the survey records. He entered a letter from Pastor Neil attesting to Clara's character. He entered a letter from the Harrow Valley School Board attesting to her professional standing. He entered a letter from Gerald Alderman, who knew the court clerk and had written with the authority of a man who had been in the same regiment and expected to be believed. Then the judge, a territorial man of some experience named Whitfield, looked at the complaint's subsidiary clause, the one about the woman of unclear standing, and looked at Clara and looked at Ethan and said, "Is it your position, Mr. Cole, that the characterization in this clause is inaccurate?" "It is, Your Honor," Ethan said. "And the current status of Mrs. Cole's relationship to the property?" "She is my wife and co-owner of the Cole Ranch," Ethan said. "Her standing could not be more clear." Judge Whitfield looked at the ring. He looked at Jasper's lawyer. He looked at his papers. "The subsidiary clause is dismissed," he said. "We'll proceed with the property complaint, which—" He reviewed the deed and the survey records for approximately 90 seconds. "Also appears to be without merit. Mr. Doss, do you have anything to add that is not already in the record?" Jasper's lawyer leaned over and said something. Jasper stared at the table. "No, Your Honor," the lawyer said. "Then I'm dismissing this complaint," Judge Whitfield said. "The Cole Ranch deed stands as recorded. Court is adjourned." He hit the gavel once clean and final, the sound of a thing being settled completely. In the hallway outside the courtroom, Jasper caught them before they reached the door. Clara felt Ethan's hand at the small of her back, not pulling her, not positioning her, just there, and she did not need it, but she was glad it was there. "Ethan," Jasper said. Ethan turned. He looked at his cousin. Blood, not family, the distinction he had always maintained, and said nothing, which was its own kind of answer. Jasper looked at Clara. Something in his face was different from the man who had stood on the ranch step and told her she should think about whether the situation was good for her. That man had been calculating. This one was just tired. "I was wrong," he said. "About all of it. I want you to know I know that." Clara looked at him for a moment. She thought about the apology he'd given in the yard in August, the one that had felt genuine because it had cost him something. This one cost him more. You could see it in his face. "I know you know it," she said. "That's something, Mr. Doss. Not forgiveness. Not the closed door of permanent condemnation either. Something in between, which was where real things usually lived." Ethan said, "Jasper, the south fence on your property line has been in need of repair for 2 years. If you want help with it in the spring, come and ask me directly." Jasper looked at him. Whatever he had expected, it wasn't that. "All right," he said. They walked out into the January cold. Ethan and Clara into the brittle, bright air of a Colorado winter morning, with the complaint dismissed and the deed standing and everything that needed to be settled. Spring came early to the mountain country that year. By March, the pass was clear enough to travel without worry. And the gelding, fully trained, now fully trusting one of the best horses on the North Range, had taken to carrying double without complaint, when Ethan and Clara rode the fence line together in the mornings before the teaching day began. Because Clara had written to the Cordell School Board in February, she had written to the new chairman, not Pendleton's inadequate son, who had left the post in December, but a woman named Geraldine Marsh, who had been appointed in the reorganization, and she had proposed a music program. Not for the school, only, though that was included. For the community. Weekly lessons open to anyone. A choir. A lending library of sheet music, to be built from donations and from the collection in her trunk, which had been sitting in the cedar chest since August waiting to be used. Geraldine Marsh had written back in 10 days. "We accept." When can you start? She started in March. Mabel Greer came to the first lesson. Clara had not expected that she had expected the women who were already disposed toward her, Ruth Calloway and Frances, and the younger mothers who had watched the Jasper situation with the cool eye of people who knew a manufactured scandal from a real one. She had not expected Mabel Greer, who sat in the back of the schoolroom with her hands in her lap and learned the C major scale with the careful, slightly embarrassed dignity of a woman doing something she had wanted to do for 30 years and could not, until now, explain why she hadn't. At the end of the lesson, Mabel said, "I didn't think I could learn." "Everyone can learn," Clara said. "It just takes someone willing to start from where you are." Mabel nodded. She came back the following week. Ruth Calloway came to the choir. She had, it turned out, a deep contralto that she had never particularly deployed in public, and Clara placed her in the back row and built the chord around her, and the first time the full choir sang together, and Ruth's voice came up through the bottom of it, like a foundation, every face in the room changed. "You knew," Clara said to Ruth afterward. "I suspected," Ruth said. "I've been waiting for someone to ask." Harold Biggs's daughter came to piano lessons. The Henderson girl, who had covered Clara's class in November, came to the advanced session and turned out to have genuine talent that had been sitting unaddressed for years. A man named Carl Dempsey, who was 61 and had never touched an instrument in his life, came to ask if it was too late to learn, and Clara told him what she had told Thomas in Harrow Valley. The wrong note is just the right note that hasn't found its way home yet, and Carl Dempsey came every Thursday for the rest of the year. The community program became the thing the town gathered around the way communities gather around things that give them back something they didn't know they'd lost. People came for the music and stayed for the feeling of it, the particular feeling of doing something difficult together and discovering that the difficulty is part of what makes it matter. On a Saturday in early May, Ethan came to watch. He sat in the back of the schoolroom with his arms folded and his hat off and watched his wife teach 14 adults the first verse of a hymn that had always been played, but never sung in cordel. And his face had an expression that Frances, sitting 3 rows ahead of him, would later describe to Doyle as the look of a man who has found exactly where he was supposed to be and knows it. Clara did not look at him while she was working. She was a professional, and her attention belonged to the room. But she knew he was there, felt it the way you feel the particular quality of an audience that is fully present, and she played fuller for it the way she always had. At the end of the session, when the room was dispersing, and people were putting on their coats and talking to each other the way people talk after shared music, which is warmer and more honest than most other conversation Ethan came to where she was closing the piano lid. "How was that?" she said. "Ruth Calloway has a remarkable voice," he said. "She does. I've been telling her for 2 months. She believes you now." He looked at the room around them, at the people still gathered at Ruth talking to Mabel Greer, of all people, at Carl Dempsey, shaking hands with Harold Biggs. "My mother would have been in that choir," he said. "Front row. She would have argued about the choice of hymns and been right about half the time." Clara looked at him. What would she have picked instead? He thought about it. "The one about the river," he said. "She always liked the ones about rivers." "I know that one." Clara picked up her music. "We'll do it next month." He took the folder from her so she didn't have to carry it the same casual automatic care he always showed, the kind that never called attention to itself. They walked out of the schoolroom together into the May afternoon. The town was quiet in the way it gets on Saturday afternoons. Not empty, but unhurried people moving at the pace of a day with some freedom in it. Several people nodded to them as they walked. Ruth Calloway waved from across the street. Mabel Greer, coming out of the dry goods, looked up and said, "Good session, Mrs. Cole," with the particular tone of a woman who has decided to be decent and means to stick to it. Clara said, "She's coming along, Mabel. She's going to surprise herself." Mabel went slightly pink with pleasure and went back into the dry goods. Ethan watched this exchange with a quiet attention. "You did that," he said when they were past. "She did that," Clara said. "I just asked her to try." They drove home in the late afternoon, the ranch road familiar under the wheels, now in the way that routes become familiar when they're traveled daily and with intention. The mountains were doing what they did in May, throwing off the last of the winter, finding their color again, going from gray to green in the slow, insistent way of things that are very large and very patient. She had been thinking for several weeks about something she wanted to do. "Ethan," she said. "Clara, I want to do something with the East Room." He glanced at her. "What kind of something?" "I want to put a piano in it. A proper one, not the school upright. There's a man in Denver selling a Steinway cabinet grand. I saw the advertisement in last month's paper. It's within what we can manage." She paused. "I want a room in the house that's just for music, where anyone who comes to learn can come. Not just the schoolroom in town, here." He was quiet for a moment. "A music room. Your mother's organ is in the front room. The music room would be for teaching, for students who need more time than the group sessions can give." She looked at the road ahead. "This house has been good at sheltering people," she said. "I'd like it to be good at making them too." He was quiet for the length of a long breath. "Write to the man in Denver," he said. "Tell him we'll take it." She looked at him. He was watching the road, his hands easy on the reins, the same posture she had first seen across the seat of this same wagon on the August afternoon when she had accepted a stranger's offer and changed the entire direction of her life. "Thank you," she said. "It's your house," he said. "It's always been your house. I just built it." She looked forward again at the ranch coming into view at the end of the road, the main house with its good timber and the barn and the bunkhouse and the corral, where the gelding was probably already waiting for Ethan's particular whistle that meant supper. The East Room was going to get the Steinway. The choir was going to sing Ruth Calloway's hymn about the river in June. Carl Dempsey was going to hit his first clean octave by July, and not be able to stop smiling about it. The gelding had found his trust. The north fence was holding. Jasper Doss had come in March, as Ethan said he might, and asked about the south fence line, and Ethan had gone with him, and the two men had worked a Saturday without much conversation and come back with the fence repaired, and something between them that was not warmth, not yet, but was the ground on which warmth might eventually grow. Eleanor Cole had written, "A home gets made by people choosing it over and over on the hard days, as much as the easy ones." The easy days were good. The hard days were real. The choosing was continuous and willing, and entirely without doubt. Clara Whitmore. Cole had arrived in Cordell with 43 cents, a trunk full of music, and a dead man's promise, and she had built from those materials and her own two hands, and one honest man's extraordinary willingness to open his door, something that the valley would call for, years after, exactly what Eleanor Cole had always wanted this house to be. She had come with nothing and made it into everything, and the house that learned to sing again sang because she refused to let it stay silent. And that was the whole of it, the full and true and final fact of it, as settled and certain as the mountains.